Hey everybody, welcome back to the I Play 2 podcast. I'm your host, Rob Adler. This week, director, writer, and podcast host Jonathan London joins the show. He wrote and directed the short film Gay by Dawn, which won the Best Horror Parody Film Award at the 2005 San Diego Comic-Con. In 2014, he wrote an 8-issue comic book miniseries called Miami Vice, based on the iconic 80s TV show. And for the last 2 decades, Jonathan has hosted the podcast Geekscape, which talks about video games, TV, movies, and comics. His brother, Paul London, is a longtime professional wrestler, has been a 3-time tag team champion and a 1-time cruiserweight champion in the WWE, and Paul owns singles wins over Bryan Danielson, Kevin Owens, and Chavo Guerrero. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hey man, I knew about 2 of those tag championships. Were there interruptions in the long run?
I believe your brother was a 2-time WWE and a 1-time World Tag Team Champion.
Okay, and I only know the 2-time WWE. I'm glad there are people who care passionately about that stuff, but this is news to me. And I guess it's not the longest running tag team championship in WWE history.
It was, but I think the New Day passed it anyways. The New Day had, I think it was like a year and a half.
So the writers didn't know what to do with them either.
But that's been true for how long? And I think you know this, but the New Day just got let go.
The guys didn't leave, they got let go?
They were offered lower contracts and they both passed on it.
I mean, that would track. I am really good friends with a guy named Mega Ran who does music. I think he did the New Day's music, but Mega Ran does a podcast on our network. Been a long time friend of mine because he started doing nerd rap. He does stuff based off samples from Mega Man, etc. And Mega Ran, he's a wrestling fan. He found himself doing music for a lot of wrestlers and got himself a Grammy nomination this year for his children's album, which is incredible. And I cannot be prouder of him. But he posted almost immediately to the New Day news, I don't know nothing, so don't ask me. Because he's close with those guys.
I'm just curious, did you ever get to go to a Mania?
No, I don't know if wrestling's my thing. I'll go and watch Paul's match, but back in the day when Paul was in WWE, I think we're just talking about the Nintendo DS. And I remember just playing Minish Cap almost an entire WWE event where it happened to be the match in San Diego with Kidman where he grazed the turnbuckle with his head and somebody had pulled back the turnbuckle in an earlier match. They kind of did a slapdash job of putting it back on. So there was an exposed bolt and it grazed Paul's head. And I think he ended up with 14, 15 staples. And he was bleeding all over the freaking place. It freaked me out. But as soon as he said he was okay, I just went back to playing Minish Cap, like my version in his comic books. I tell my friends or people who ask, like, how'd your brother get into wrestling? Same way I got into comic books. Dudes in tights doing feats of fantastic athleticism. And we love the soap opera of it. And it's weekly in wrestling, it's monthly in comics, and it's high drama. We love that stuff, man. So Paul and I are cut from pretty close cloths on that stuff. But here's my Mania story, though. It was Paul's birthday in April when Mania was here in LA. I remember we went with Carlito to a Laker game, and then we went to the Hall of Fame induction ceremony, and then there was an event at the Sheraton Universal where they were all staying. Paul invited me to that, so I went over to the Sheraton Universal and I walked in and I was like, oh my God, the Iron Sheik's right there, and met Dwayne Johnson that night. And then the best part of the night, though, was there was a really great buffet. And I'm sitting at the buffet and I'm walking along the buffet and I'm happy as a clam because I like to eat. And I feel somebody step up right next to me. And I'm 6 feet, but everybody in that room is, for the most part, bigger than me. But this is a superstar. This is an action figure. And he stands up next to me and he's kind of a little bit of my personal space, but he's enthused about the food as well. And his shoulder is about where my head is. And I just hear that signature voice, which I'm going to try and impersonate, but I'm going to fail badly. You got to try the shrimp, man. That's a damn great shrimp. And I was like, yes, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Of course I will try the shrimp now. The shrimp was excellent, Stone Cold Steve Austin. But he was insistent that I have some shrimp. That's my favorite memory from Mania weekend is Stone Cold being super nice and coming up and be like, hey, man, don't leave this line with other damn shrimp, brother. Of course, I don't want you to stun me into the freaking cheese platter. I took the shrimp. It was awesome.
I've met Austin as well, and he was taping a commercial for ESPN where Dan Patrick hit him in the back with a chair. And I actually met Austin in the washroom. I'm not kidding. It was Austin and Tom Pritchard. And it's like, oh my gosh.
Those were really cool memories. Or going to Denny's outside of Bakersfield with Kurt Angle and stuff like that is always wonderful. Talking to Scotty Tuhati about his kids, and then now seeing them grown up. And when I see them at conventions, whether it's John Morrison or something like that, like we hug it out. Chavo Guerrero always looked out for Paul, hug it out with him. And Paul's still training people. He's still doing shows. He's still involved. I sent him a clip. I think Cody Rhodes had this podcast, and somebody texted me and was like, dude, you got to watch this podcast. It's Cody Rhodes. And Randy Orton starts talking about my brother in a very laudatory way. Just like, dude, Paul London was this, Paul London was that. You got to see him now. He comes out and he sings to the audience and stuff like that. And 5-6 minutes of those two guys just talking about my brother. And I took the clip and I texted it to Paul. And I said, do you have any idea these guys still think about you in this high esteem? And he's like, I had no idea, dude. This makes me feel really good. And it's really sweet. And I'm like, oh, good. I'm not the only one who looks out for my brother and holds him in high esteem. But through Geekscape, I end up meeting a lot of actors and filmmakers and different personalities, whether I have them on the show or I host them at conventions. In 2 weeks, I've got the 90210 cast and the Arrow cast, the Flash cast. And I'm excited to talk to Jan Jurgens, the comic book writer who did Death of Superman. We want to really talk about that because I think it's in its 35th anniversary or so. I'm always meeting people in my world of movies, video games, comic books that I look up to.
When you come into, let's say, the comic book world entertainment genre, when you meet somebody well known, who's somebody that you've met that you were maybe in a little bit of awe of, maybe somebody you idolized growing up or somebody you just couldn't believe that was in the room with you?
Stan Lee every single time. No matter how kind he was over our years working together, it was always going to be Stan. He was my hero as a kid. He was the person who got me writing. The things I read growing up were J.R.R. Tolkien, and then it was Stan. And then LA Comic Con today, when it launched its Kamikaze, POW Entertainment teamed with Geekscape, teamed with Kamikaze to do the launch party at Comic Con. And then I was moderating Stan's conventions at Kamikaze. I was his moderator. And we did videos together, and he would shoot me videos on like major Geekscape episodes. And I will actually cry if I talk about Stan. But I never got the chance to meet Jack Kirby, or it would have been Jack Kirby as well. But those two guys were who I knew growing up, were responsible for all the stories that I loved in the Marvel Universe. I liked DC. I thought it was great, but they weren't real to me in the way that Spider-Man's an everyman. And Clark, even though as an adult I realized how human Superman is, and I think that's the coolest thing about him is he could have easily turned us all into food and been like, I'm ruling your planet. But the humanity in him is that he doesn't, and that he aspires to be an example for all of us and to lead with compassion and lead by example and all these things that a hero does. But Bruce is a little different. I always think of Batman as a holdover from the pulp days where most of the heroes were wealthy people who midnighted as characters like the Phantom or the Shadow. And that's Batman. And so Batman, I always feel like, got drafted into the world of superheroes, but really is a pulp character. And he still works alongside them. And I think it's cool. There's a lot of cool things about Batman, but I'm a Marvel guy. Love those real world characters that existed in New York City, not made up metropolises. And you could turn a corner and maybe you see Johnny Storm fighting Giganto or something like, oh, wow, cool. This is all happening in the real world. The West Coast Avengers on the West Coast, the Hulk's rampaging in New Mexico, and all these places we've been. It wasn't Coast City, which that has its appeal, but those are the things that built me. And then, of course, Nintendo, like getting that first NES. When you solicited me to come on the show and it said I played too, I was like, yep, very much played a lot of video games and loved the original NES and saved my money for a Genesis so I could play Sonic and carried it on through for years and still do. I mean, not with a toddler. My Switch 2's over there collecting dust, but those are characters that are important to me. The adventure in Zelda, sense of discovery of an open world. and trying to see what does that do. Adventure gaming was huge for me as well. Sierra games, the LucasArts games, just trying different things. It's all about curiosity, it's all about character, all about story, not so much the shooting games.
I know it was a shooting game, but there was also a sense of adventure in it because the background was kind of a little bit different. Did you ever play Defender?
Yeah, I played Defender. It was a little before my time because that's an arcade shooter and it was from the 80s and it was mainly an Atari game, didn't really port to the NES, but those games are fascinating to me because the rules and the mechanics of video gaming was being defined in that era. I had one of the guys from early in television on my show. We were at the convention together. I waved him over and I said, "Hey, man, can you give me 15 minutes on a microphone? I got to talk to you, Keith." He's since passed, but he was telling me about the 70s and designing video games and was saying we really only had blocks. So we're sitting there trying to program blocks and we had a limited amount of colors and we created the language of video games, the designation that red is bad and green is life and blue is this. And they were creating the language of it. And so I think stuff like Defender and Pitfall are pretty interesting because those are games that went in both directions. I think Atari also had top down, and some of that stuff carried over to the NES. Maybe some of the games went right left on the NES. I know Kung Fu did in some levels, but for the most part, once you get to the NES, it is left to right because it's based on the way that Western world reads. A game like Kung Fu maybe has a little bit of right to left because it's developed in Japan. The same thing with manga versus Western comics. When I write comics, I have to really think about the way the eye moves. And I write it into my books, and the artists that I love collaborating with, they're natural storytellers. They work that in as well and make sure that there's really not a mental lapse when you go from a word balloon or an image to the next one. It's got to flow naturally because if there's any break, it's like sitting in a movie and realizing that you have to do laundry later that day. Like, you don't want that to happen. You want to be watching the movie. You want to be immersed in the world. And with comics, the flow of your eye is what's important. And those early games, Defender, you suddenly going right, left, left, right. That's incredible. And then same thing with Pitfall. Like, you can do whatever you want. So you're really just trying to clear screens in either direction. But the NES pretty much shut the door on that. And then by the time you get to Sonic the Hedgehog and then Donkey Kong Country, we ain't hearing it. The 3D games took over, and those are running forward. Could you imagine a 3D game where you're running towards camera? Fuck no. But like the language of video games of the 70s and 80s, that stuff's amazing. It's big for me.
But it's interesting how going from left right instead of top down, because I'm thinking of like Donkey Kong and certain things that were
Mm-hmm.
top down. And I never really thought about that there was a transition. But now that I'm thinking about it, it's like I played a lot of Mortal Kombat or Double Dribble, which was a basketball
And your
game.
character's on the left.
Correct, and I never really thought about that before. And when you think something like Donkey Kong, it was top down.
Donkey Kong is based on an arcade cabinet. That's different than a console. So when you take those things home and you're playing on a console, you started doing the left right a little bit more. On an arcade cabinet, so Donkey Kong is a static map. It doesn't scroll upwards as you climb the girders. The first Mario Brothers game is a static map. As the turtles come out of the chutes, it doesn't scroll in either direction. I think that's super cool. So I gasped when Pac-Land came out. Suddenly it's like a Mario game, but it's Pac-Man in his own platformer. That game's not very successful. Guess what? That game also goes right to left. It goes against the grain. So you mentioned Donkey Kong. The coolest thing about Donkey Kong, and I told this story earlier today, Donkey Kong's not a Donkey Kong game. Miyamoto programmed a Popeye game and then failed to get the license. Every time you play Donkey Kong, or when you go out and see Mario Galaxy, which I give 5 stars, when you go see Mario from now on, you're watching Popeye. Like, this dude saw the arcade market in the US and he's like, this is where the money is. I'm going to make a game based on Popeye. And he designed an entire game where Popeye climbs girders to save olive oil from Bluto at the top. And all right, Popeye owners, can I get a license so I can make a popular Popeye game for the American arcade market? And they were like, no. And he said, uh-oh. So he changed the characters to what we know today. It's pretty awesome. I love Popeye, but Mario and Donkey Kong are much more popular than Popeye ever was. And that's your lesson for today, my man. Then when you saw him on the NES, left to right, and everybody's minds were blown.
You can only pick one. I'm going to make you pick one. What is your favorite
sure.
video game of all time?
Oh my God. Like, how much time you got? I found myself writing the second issue of Paul London Here, the Prophecy, my comic book with my brother. And I got to a place where Paul has to solve a puzzle. And I was like, dude, this is a LucasArts game. This is like Maniac Mansion, or like my favorite, and I'll say it, is Monkey Island. This is a character in an adventure game who is met with a problem, and he uses his brain and his creativity, or just haphazard attempts to solve it. And so I realized as I was writing issue 2 of Hear the Prophecy that it would get really old if I just did Conan style. No offense to Conan. I love the Conan comics, but he usually is just overpowering things. It's sword and sorcery. Conan usually overcomes things because he's stronger, more stubborn, more brute strength. But I think that gets kind of boring as I'm writing it, because I'm not as talented a writer as Kurt Busiek or Zeb Wells, people who've written Conan recently and did it amazingly. I'm just Jonathan London, so if I'm going to write a scene like that, in an issue 2, it's Paul versus a Cyclops. He's not going to overpower a Cyclops. Like, that's not very cool. In the Hero the Prophecy comics, and I wrote it as a love letter to Paul because I wanted to just tell him I love him. He's a hero. So I wrote a story about a fantasy world that sees wrestling. They think it's real because they think it's an arena battle. And they see this wrestler and they're like, oh my God, he's amazing. And they use their one chance to summon him through space and time to battle an evil wizard to free them. And the wrestler shows up and it's like, well, y'all done fucked up because that was pantomime and acrobatics. And so he better figure it out fast. I can't just write that character as a total bum, wash up, has been wrestler and then have him show up on a planet teeming with monsters and fantasy creatures and then have him just start beating them. He cannot be a single monster. Spoilers for Hero the Prophecy. He is outmatched in every issue. But through creativity, through heart, through camaraderie, through working together, through tag teaming with his compatriots, he overcomes. There's a lot of wrestling in this book. And I was super disappointed when like a fellow writer who writes books for the big two, DC and Marvel, was like, I thought this was going to be more wrestling. And I'm like, it is. He's just wrestling a Cyclops, or he's fighting in an arena that has spikes around it. So the rules are pretty much the Royal Rumble. Like, you don't want to go over the top rope or you die. That's the kind of the fun thing about the book. There are wrestling tropes in it. There is Money in the Bank match. There are beats like a wrestling match in it, but he's fighting a lizard person or a minotaur or things like that. I'd rather watch that any day of the week. Paul fighting a Cyclops that is huge. Yeah, dude, that's him versus any of those giant dudes he went up against. I love it. That's cool. All right, good luck, man. You're about to get pounded. But he doesn't. And that's puzzling. Like, that's the puzzles aspect that I took from adventure gaming. And I thought that was fun, like writing it and realizing, oh, dude, this comes out of the stories you love, the adventure games. So I'm going to go with Monkey Island, and it's going to be followed pretty closely by the Zelda games. And then it's going to be followed pretty closely by the Mario games, the GTA games. Because even the GTA games, even though they're like prone to violence and people are like, oh my God, they're ruining society, they're not Call of Duty games. Like, how many times have you actually played a GTA game where you're not using problem solving? Like, yo, I got to take this dude out. He's in this warehouse, or he's part of this gang and it's just me. And so I got to be strategic about how I take these dudes out one at a time, or create a diversion, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to jump out of the car as it's on fire. Yeah, it is a violent game, but like, how many times have you been like, I'm going to solve this by going and stealing a helicopter from the army base? Like, sometimes I get way creative, like overly creative in solving missions in GTA that you do not have to be creative in doing. Like, yes, you could slowly just rat-a-tat-tat, heal, rat-a-tat-tat, heal, take them out, hide, cover, da-da-da-da. You could do that stuff with a GTA game. Go to the shop, get the bazooka, kill them from a distance, go, get some cars, barricade. But like, sometimes I'm just, cool, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the army base. I'm going to get an effing tank. Then I'm going to take that tank into the subway system. I'm going to use the subway system to thread some of the police off of me until the stars start blinking out. Then, once I'm clear of the police officers, I'm going to run that tank right up to his warehouse. Sometimes I'm like, what's the most ridiculous way I could beat this mission? You play GTA, like you ever have them chase you and you try and thread them to a gas station? See how many of them blow up? I do all those things. It's fun.
The GTA games remind me of two things, and you kind of just alluded to them both. But one is at some points it almost feels like an escape room where you got to find your clues to get there. And then the other thing about the GTA games, when you do it as you described, what I call the ridiculousness of it, let's see how ridiculous we can be. It reminded me of the old McDonald's commercials with the nothing but net with Michael Jordan and
Yeah.
Larry Bird.
I can't wait for GTA 6. It'll never come out, but I can't wait for GTA 6 because I like the problem solving. Same thing. It goes back to the Sierra games and the LucasArts adventure games. I love the problem solving, which is why Skyward Sword was the frustrating one because the sword pointed you to where you needed to go. Not a lot of exploration in that one. So Breath of the Wild just blew me away. Don't tell me what to do. Let's figure this out. Let's follow the winds and let's explore, which is what Zelda's all about. And I love the Red Dead games, and another one I platinumed was Ghost of Tsushima, which is like a samurai version of a GTA type game, like 3/4 top down, going through open world, doing your thing. I love those kind of games, and I think in both Red Dead and Ghost of Tsushima, I'm like, all right, how am I going to solve this in a different way? Like, I'm going to sneak into this Shogun's castle. I'm going to try this way. I'm going to throw some stuff over there, smoke bomb, do. That stuff's fun. I know we're talking a lot of video games. This is my passion. I love this stuff. And then it inspires my linear storytelling. Like film and comics and stuff is all linear. Shots go in front of shots, panels go in front of panels. But the way I get to them isn't linear. I live with these things for a bit, especially with Tom, who's drawing Hear the Prophecy now. Like Tom will come at me with like wild ideas. And my first instinct is to be like, no, because I've lived with this for a while. And then I sit with it for a day or two and I'll come back and be like, we're going to do exactly what you said. I fit the block into the thing because I'd much rather collaborate with people and do stuff by myself. Spoilers for issue 3, but Tom comes to me and says, hey, I wanted to have ducks in it. I was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, you know what? I'm going to write it and you just draw it. Okay, pal? I won't get mad. I'm just like, what? I don't see it. Then I'll spend a day or two and I'll be thinking about it. I have like a anthropomorphized owl in the book. The owls are studious and they're the custodians of the world and they're smart and bookish and wizards. Can't there be other humanoid birds? Why not ducks? What if the ducks are warriors? What if the ducks are battle hardened and ferocious? What if we're talking like Planet of the Apes and you have the gorillas and the chimps, right? Because those are kind of what I just told you. The orangutans are like the studious, peaceful ones, and the gorillas are the ones who are warlike. And I was like, let's do that with owls and ducks. And then I turned around, I was like, I got it. I did it. Tom, you're getting your ducks. But they're huge and they're badasses. They don't take no gruff and they hate the owls and they're going to have to work together. And that's another puzzle for Paul to solve is having these two warring tribes united to defeat a common enemy. And you got to be at the center of it. In issue 4, that's the corner he has to turn is how does he have these characters that were established as there's no way I'm working with you in issue 3. In issue 4, how do you get them to be like, not only am I asking you to work with me, I'm asking you to save an owl. I need your help and you need to buy in. So Paul learns diplomacy. And it all started because Tom said, I want to draw ducks in the book. I can't wait for people to read issue 3 and see the ducks. One of my producers, Dom, he texted me back. He said, plushies. He's like, action figures and plushies of the ducks. That's what you're doing. I was like, okay, let's figure out how to do it.
Over the years, because you've collaborated with many different artists, for people who are, let's say, up and coming comic book writers or illustrators, what advice do you have for them to make sure that their collaboration with whoever it is becomes successful?
You got to stay open-minded. Like I just told you how I stay open-minded. I didn't shut Tom down. I need my collaborators enthused and excited and invested in the book, especially the fact that we're not paying Marvel and DC rates. We're trying to pay the same rates that other indie publishers are paying, but it's literally just me and George Caller, my partner with Geekscape. So we pay for the book and then we kickstart the money back to ourselves with the Geekscape audience. And so you have to not shut down your collaborators. The same way I won't walk onto a set with actors and they read the scene and then immediately be like, you're going to stand here and then you're going to do this, or you're going to do that. That's not directing. That's being a jerk. Like, you've literally just shut down any idea they're going to bring to the table. Like, you're going to tell Morgan Freeman how to do the scene? Dude, you're going to learn something from him. But if you come in and start saying, do this, do that, do this, do that, you're not going to learn anything, right? Are you going to tell Martin Scorsese where to put a camera? No, dude, you're not going to do that. So you come in and say, let's play. Here's what I have. I'm handing it to you. Do what you will with it. And then let's suggest ideas to each other. But the screenplay for Hear the Prophecy is so much different than the comic script in everything but narrative arcs. The narrative arcs are the same, but it's so much more interesting as a comic because of Tom's contribution and what he's passionate about. So what I will tell people who want to get into it, learn on the fly as I'm doing. People are literally watching me learn how to write comics better. They're watching me very publicly in my sphere of comfort. We're not selling a zillion of them, but we're selling 1,000 of them. Keep in mind that Invincible at its highest sold 12,000 a month with Image Comics. And now it's a successful, huge Amazon series. But just for the frame of reference, as far as comic publishing goes, a book like Invincible on an indie publisher like Image with a successful creator who's well known from a mega selling comic that influenced a major TV franchise sold 12,000 copies. Hear the Prophecy 1 is past 1,000 copies being sold out of my trunk without bookstores, without comic stores, Run DMC style. Out of the trunk of my car, as we did this weekend at Free Comic Book Day with our signings. And do I want a lunar code and the ability to go into comic stores and wider? Yes, it will scale there. But if I'm only producing 1 or 2 or 3 of these a year, that is not enough to sustain putting it in comic shops for very long. I want to be able to do this more full time and be able to create more comics faster and feed the metabolism of a comic book buyer who comes to the store looking for something every week to be able to see my book at least every month. That's the goal. And I'll feel much more comfortable when we have the 6-issue first arc done. We can see where it goes from there, but at least we'll have a trade. And when maybe somebody out there wants to reissue the 6 issues. But none of this would have happened if I hadn't just started. So this is the longest thing to say to anybody. But what I would say to that first person who's like, I want to write comics, I want to get into film, is learn as you go. And don't be afraid to do it very publicly. Don't do it in a diary because it doesn't count. Like, scripts on your hard drive aren't worth anything. I know people who are like, I wrote it and that's good enough for me. And I'm like, nope, not good enough for me. I want people to say, I liked it. I hated it. It made me think of this. It made me think of that. Then I had somebody be like, no offense, it kind of reminded me of those old fantasy movies that show in USA Up All Night. And I'd be like, dude, that's exactly what it should do. That is hitting it on the head. It should make you think of Golden Globus films from the 1980s. That is what this is. I'm putting my brother in a Golden Globus movie for the 1980s. He is the Beastmaster now. I love that. That's so cool. So to the person who said, I thought there'd be more wrestling in this, A, there's tons of wrestling in it. B, it's just not in a ring. And C, it's primarily a fantasy book with wrestling tropes. So if you're a wrestling fan, you're going to effing love it. If you are a fantasy fan, you're going to love it. And if you're a fan of Army of Darkness or Big Trouble in Little China or any of those mistaken identity, wrong guy, wrong place movies, or a smart-ass protagonist is the last remaining hope for mankind, you're going to love it. It's popcorn, and I love it because through it, I get to talk to my brother and tell him I love him. But don't worry, I had to tell him. I was like, dude, issue 3 is not really going to be good for you. Issue 4 is not going to be good for you either. But by the end of it, you get better. Issue 5, you start making some big stuff. Issue 6, of course you save the day. You kidding me? I'm not going to write where he fails. Because my brother, he saves the day at the end. What do you got at the end and like Luke Skywalker gets his head lopped off by Darth Vader? You know how pissed you'd be?
You know how much I would have loved that? I love when the villain wins in a movie.
You wouldn't have been because it's Star Wars. You would have been cool if it happened in an A24 film. If it happened in a smaller film, totally. Remember the video game Braid? You think you're the good guy, and at the end of it, you realize you're not. Like, I thought that was great. And then at the end, you realize, oh, you caused all this, and you're actually a creeper. I think that you would have hated it in the same way that you didn't like it in the sequels when Luke just up and died as a ghost. It was so completely dissatisfying. Luke and Han and Leia didn't even really see each other. We want the new characters now in the sequels, and we like the new characters in the Star Wars movies. But we wanted to see the story closed, and we wanted to see the story satisfied, and we weren't. We didn't get that. And that's the frustrating thing with the prequels and the sequels is that the original trilogy was good on its own, and it was satisfying on its own. And even though we got Ewoks in the end instead of Wookiees, decapitated stormtroopers are being played by a bunch of little bears, but that's fine. Don't worry about that. But we loved Return of the Jedi for that reason because it was satisfying. It wasn't the best one. It was the weakest of the first three movies. But you would not have been okay with Luke Skywalker dying at the end of Return of the Jedi. You just wouldn't have. You might have been okay with Lando not making it out of the Death Star. You remember there was talk of like maybe Han dies and doesn't get rescued. There was supposedly a lot of talk of Lando not making it out of the Death Star and Han looking up at it explode and going, Lando, no. But we like it the way it is. We want our heroes to win. I think that it's okay that Shane walks away at the end and you don't know whether or not he's alive or dead, like he's been shot. And he walks away before we see him collapse, right? Like it's Shane. He's the hero. But I think you need a satisfying ending. And at the end of the day, I think that two of the three Star Wars trilogies, the latter two, were ones where things weren't satisfied. And it stings. And I think that Hear the Prophecy, I don't care about spoiling it. I think it's a kick-ass book. And I think people who read all 6 issues or the trade when you get there are going to be like, yes, when they see the good guys victorious. Is that the end of the story? It's the end of that chapter.
But there's the wrestling trope as well. Is part of the good guy winning is the chase where the bad guy, the heel, is winning, looks like they're going to win, might even win an initial battle. And it's the whole chase for the good guy, in this case, Paul, to come out on top.
Yes. Does he stay on top? Well, it's kind of funny how much that stuff is ingrained in storytellers or fans because the way I wrote it out, it's for wrestling fans. I think wrestling fans are going to be like, dude, he took that from that. That's wrestling. That's wrestling. That's wrestling. That's wrestling. It's just Western heroic storytelling. And it's just what we grew up with. And so wrestling does a good job of it. The soap opera of the continuation, good guy turns bad, good guy gets redeemed. I think that stuff is huge. I like the idea that Darth Vader was redeemed at the end of Jedi. I thought it was awesome. When he picks up the Emperor and chucks him, I'm like, yes, thank you. The prequels and seeing him descend into Vader, that one's tough because he wasn't the protagonist. I don't think Anakin should have ever been a protagonist at any point in the Star Wars stories. And it confused matters. There's whole stretches where it's Anakin, and I'm like, no. I think the tragedy of him is the witnessing of it and not being able to help. I'm like, Luke is not able to help Anakin until he is almost dead. And then he sees him getting crispied by the Emperor. And you have that amazing shot where he's looking back and forth, Vader going, huh? And then he decides, this is my son, I can't do this. And it's awesome. But at the end of the day, like that first trilogy, the prequels, should have been Obi unable to save his friend. But it wasn't singular in its point of view, the way that the first trilogy was singular. There was a sequence in the second movie where Yoda says, go to Chimino, find the source of the clone army. And then you're like, cool, I know at least what's going to happen next. This isn't going to be swimming. Because there's a lot of swimming around in those movies. That's why they're 3 hours long. But like, when you get to that part where Yoda's like, here's a mission, I think the audience goes, oh, thank you. Thanks for letting us know what needs to be achieved in this story for us to have a barometer of how the character's doing. And it's tough to do without just being expositional about it and taking the air out of it. But if you don't do that, the audience is like, where's this going? And I found myself in the opening crawl of the prequels being like, what is this? I don't know what needs to happen for this to be successful. And I kind of felt like that with the sequels as well. I think Rey was cool. And people were like, oh, she's a Mary Sue. Became powerful in the Force. So powerful. I was like, did you see Luke not do it? Luke sucks. He is too old to learn to be a Jedi. He's getting his ass tagged by that remote flying around in the Millennium Falcon, zapping his ass while he's got that blind helmet on. First off, Han saves his ass. So, like, let's not hear any of that. He is not actually good at anything until Jedi. When he shows up and he's in the cloak, Yoda's yelling at him like, dude, you're old, too slow. Like, I told you not to go to Bespin, and now you got your hand cut off. And guess what? You were holding on to dear life. They had to save your ass. Those first two movies, Luke has to get his ass saved. So I don't want to hear it about Rey. She picked up on the Force pretty quick. But guess what? She's better than Luke because she was living by herself on a desert planet without parents for a long time. She was surviving by herself on a desert planet since childhood. If anything, she should have been more powerful. You should have met her and she's already using the Force in ways that she doesn't understand. She should have been like exploring those dilapidated Star Destroyers and been like feral. She should have been like Princess Mononoke from a Miyazaki movie. Like she should have been like a badass. And then this little droid shows up and she's like, no, I'm better off in the jungle. I don't want to go. It could have been a much more linear story. I have lots of opinions about that because I love them so much. I love it, but don't go messy. And it went messy. But if my daughter is like, Rey's my favorite character and Babu Frick is my dude, and I love the sequels and those are my favorite things. If my daughter says that to me, I'll be like, good. Then that's my favorite now because it's not about what I wanted in those things.
One thing I do want to get in before I let you go is how did Geekscape begin and did you envision it growing to what it's become now?
Yes, but it is short of what I want it to be. But it's also not entirely mine. It's for the podcasters. It's a place for me to let other people come and play in it. So for me, no, I want to be making more movies. I want to have more comics, but a lot of that is based on my own fear and my own trepidation about entering a space and making my own books, failure, and whether or not I could do this. And I allow myself the regret of not doing it earlier. Like I've had the booth at San Diego since 2010. It's a piece of real estate that a lot of creators would love to have. I should have had a comic out by 2011. I had a Super Action Man comic, but I let somebody else publish it for me. I still own it. I'll republish that material soon, but the new material is better. So I'm doing the new material now, and then we'll reprint the old Super Action Man story and stuff like that. And then I went to write Miami Vice for Lion Forge because they're friends. And that was in 2014, but by 2015, 16, somewhere in there, the license was done. And I wasn't able to tell the second half of my story. And that was really frustrating for me. But keep in mind that's in 2016, 2015. By that point, it didn't motivate me to act. At that point, I should have just been like, cool, learn my lesson. If you want to finish your stories, you got to own your stories. Let's do this ourselves. And I didn't. So it wasn't really until we were walking around the studios during the strike in 2023 that people were talking about what stories they would tell if they could tell any stories they wanted to tell. And for me, it was Hero of the Prophecy. And I had a ton of scripts. I had a ton of material for Hero of the Prophecy. I had a ton of stuff for Super Action Man, which is the next comic we have coming up. It's like a G.I. Joe kind of fun book. But I finally said, dude, you ain't getting any younger, homie. And you should have done this in 2010, 11. And your booth at San Diego is not really a destination because you're not really selling your stories there. You're not really doing anything unique. You're just kind of showcasing you're a filmmaker and a podcaster. It was fun in 2005, 6, 7 when not a lot of people were doing it, but now everybody's doing it. So who cares? You need to give them a reason to care. And that's on me. And it's what gets me writing as fast as possible. So my advice, going back to the person I was supposed to give advice to way back, was fail spectacularly and rapidly. Because it's not about something good. As much as I'm not a fan of the prequels, the sequels, those are somebody's favorite Star Wars movies. I've met people who are like, Revenge of the Sith is my favorite Star Wars movie. And I'm like, cool, respect. It's not on me to take that from them. I would be a massive piece of garbage if I took that from them. I'm probably a massive piece of garbage for already going as far as I did earlier. So you're allowed to have that. You're allowed to love that. You're allowed to be inspired by that. You're allowed to see yourself in that. So the fear is that failure, that embarrassment. People don't like my stories. You will not know until you do it. So if anything, I wish I'd shaken Jonathan 15 years ago and said, every year, this booth, you need to have 2 or 3 more issues, which I have now, and I'll have 6, 7 next year. But I would have had whole libraries of cool original stories if I'd have done this starting back in 2010 when I first had that booth. So YOLO, let's do it from here on out. Let's keep telling stories. Let's keep going. That's me quashing those regrets and doing the best I can with what I got left. And I learned it from Paul. Paul was somebody that was going to take no for an answer when he was going after wrestling. It was really hard on our family. It was hard on all of us. We didn't want him to do it. We wanted him to have a more traditional path, a safer path physically, mentally, economically. He absolutely refused, and it put a strain on our family that was huge. And it was hard. I didn't know where my loyalties were. It was tough to do a lot of those things that put me in a bad situation. And I allowed myself to be put in a bad situation. Like, Paul's not wrestling. He's on magazines by that point. Like, are you kidding me? But that was me trying to be a good brother. So it was hard, man. And I'm very grateful that he didn't get seriously hurt, because what would I have done? That would have been on me. So I don't know what else to say. You just got to live it.
I went and watched Gay by Dawn before we had done this, and what I loved more than anything else was the lighting. I just loved the way the lighting kind of set everything up as the scenes kept going, because it's not something that oftentimes gets necessarily always focused on, but I had to end up watching it twice because I missed some dialogue the first time because I was so enamored with the lighting. And the fact that you won an award at San Diego Comic-Con is impressive.
That movie played 80 festivals, and that movie played 10-year anniversary screenings. That movie kept going. And it was a movie that my alma mater, Columbia University, didn't want me to do as my thesis. We don't make these kind of movies here. But it was the movie I wanted to make. And I wanted to make people laugh. And it's kind of mean what I did, because I knew that people were going to make film school movies that were very serious and exploratory and pregnant with their art. So I did something probably out of my own insecurities. Oh, I can't make a movie like that that's self-examination or lofty in those goals, because I think those students do when they make film school movies is actually pretty admirable. They're trying to make pieces of art. They're trying to make things that are important, and I think that's huge. I took the easy way out. I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to crash your party. I'm going to make a film that when they play this film, after people have sat through your movies that are snobby or artful or a little higher brow than mine, I'm going to hit it like a freaking rock song. And I think people are going to feel a sense of relief because they've sat through a lot of the same tone of seriousness as you do with film schools. It worked. It worked like gangbusters. And the school played mine last. Maybe they were hoping people would leave before the final film, but I've never seen an audience react like they did for that first Gay by Dawn screening. It was huge. I was like you, I was missing dialogue. I was like, no, stop laughing. There's dialogue. There's a joke that I really like. You just missed it. But people were so raucous to finally be laughing. And a couple years earlier, Robert Rodriguez had told me, if you just keep it short and keep it funny, it'll do gangbusters. And that was my rule. I kept telling myself that. Short, funny, short, funny, short, funny. And it worked. But the other films on their own were probably really serious, cool, wonderful movies. I know some of them were great. We definitely didn't win Best of Fest. And I think people also want to have fun. And I think that movie's fun. And that lighting is all Jeff Shepard, who is a wonderful DP. And we shot that movie on 16. But you still got to make it good. And I think that's what sucks about a lot of movies with Hear the Prophecy. Like, oh, it doesn't have to be that good because we're making fun of this old genre and they're so campy. And I don't do that. That's really condescending. People who are making those movies you think are campy, those movies that you think are bad, it's so bad it's good, right? Don't do that. Those people try to make the best movie they could for the most part. I met the dude who made Rock and Roll Nightmare, a movie that is beloved. He tried to make a really good horror movie. People love Rock and Roll Nightmare. I love Rock and Roll Nightmare. Fans came and made a sequel to Rock and Roll Nightmare. But with Hear the Prophecy, people are watching me learn how to write comics. I'm writing the best comic I can. I'm writing the most earnest comic I can, saying the things I want to say in the genres of wrestling and fantasy to my brother. That is what I'm doing. And I'm trying to do it to the best of my abilities. With Gay by Dawn, I wanted to make a movie about homophobia, but I wanted to make a comedy. I wanted it to be shot as best as it could be shot. That's Jeff Shepard. That's 16 millimeter. I didn't want to shoot that movie on TV. I didn't want to cut corners because, oh, it's so bad it's good. I didn't want to do that. I think that's rude. I think you make the best movie you can. When it falls short, it's still sincere because you made a sincere movie. If you do that wink wink bullshit and you're like, hey, check it out, it's got neon colors, so it's silly, I just think you're a jerk. I think you're making fun of filmmakers who tried the best they could and made something that by today's standards fell short. And I was just talking to somebody on Sunday about sequels. Like, we've been trying to make feature versions of Give It On for 15, 20 years. Just, I'm not going to do a script that's and I know we're talking about Gay by Dawn, But again, you don't get there by trying to make something bad. You get there by trying to make something good with these limited resources you have. Don't aim for bad, guys. Aim for as good as possible. And it's okay. Plenty of people think it's bad. And who knows? It might just actually turn out great.
It does, and I love parody. When something gets parodied, especially when it's a serious topic or a semi-serious topic, that's the best way because you have to work doubly hard because you're trying to add some humor to something that may not be very humorous to a lot of people.
I was pissed when I made that movie. I was pissed at the Bush administration. I was pissed at homophobia. There's a book, The Redneck Manifesto, and it's a really great book. It's about racism and the straight white male being really the only person you can poke fun at anymore. And it's not a pro-white book. It is a book that is pro-poor. It is, hey, in case you haven't noticed, we're all being separated by the people with the money. That's what the Redneck Manifesto is. So you can make fun of the white dude all you want. He may be the only person you're allowed to still make fun of. But understand, making fun of poor people is ultimately the most fucked up thing you can do because the people who control the messages are the people who are billionaires and we're all being manipulated by them. So I read that book and I was like, cool. And now we end up with a climate where trans kids and gay kids are 3 times as likely to not do high school graduations because they hate their own lives. That is awful. So that's why I made Gay White On to make fun of those billionaires. And I'll do it again in a heartbeat. We just have to get the right script because it's a serious topic and it has to be parodied. You just have to do it right.
I'm hopeful at some point there was a little bit of an ode to Blazing Saddles and the campfire scene. For me, like when they first sat down and were doing it, I'm like, this feels like Blazing Saddles. I wonder where we're going.
I think that's great. You brought that to the conversation. I think that's great. I love it. It's just a trope from horror movies, the campfire scene in horror movies. It had to look like Sleepaway Camp. And I said that in the text yesterday to somebody. I was like, hey, if we're talking about a feature, it's got to look sweaty like Sleepaway Camp and Deliverance. That's the language of this movie.
I can't wait for the send up of dueling banjos.
Maybe they're not banjos.
Jonathan, I do want to thank you for coming on the I Play 2 podcast today. I very much appreciate it. Good luck with the new comic book and continued success, man. Take care and thank you again.
Dude, of course. And please cut this down to 3 minutes. Good luck. Thanks for having me, dude. Sincerely.